Welcome back to another explosive countdown. This year, BTS didn't just break records, they completely shattered the fabric of live entertainment. From gravity-defying choreography to raw, emotional vocals that left absolute legends completely speechless. Yes, we are talking about that mind-blowing viral Bruno Mars reaction. They proved exactly why they are untouchable. But which stage truly defined their legendary legacy this year? Was it the intensely fiery solo breaks or the massive stadium-shaking global anthems that gave us all goosebumps? Buckle up as we dissect the magic, the sweat, and the sheer unstoppable power of these 7 icons. Which stage stole the absolute crown and left the whole world begging for more? Let's dive straight into the top 7 most iconic BTS performances of the year. Number 7. RM. The Leader's Roar, a Poetic Storm, Unleashed. Have you ever witnessed a moment so profoundly raw and electrifying that the entire world seemingly stopped spinning on its axis just to pay attention? That is exactly what happened when the undeniable leader of BTS, RM, also known as Kim Namjoon, stepped onto that dimly lit stage, transforming a mere music performance into a transcendent, breathtaking masterclass of high art, deep philosophy, and unyielding hip-hop dominance. Picture this, because the atmosphere was absolutely chilling. The colossal stadium is plunged into absolute pitch-black darkness without a single warning. A sudden, deafening silence falls over the sea of millions of fans. The globally renowned sparkling army bomb ocean is suddenly and deliberately extinguished, creating an eerie, almost sacred void in the cold night air, waiting to be filled. Suddenly, a single, piercingly sharp white spotlight cuts through the heavy, tense atmosphere, illuminating a lone figure standing center stage. His head is bowed, but an aura of immense, quiet, and terrifying power radiates from his very posture. He was clad in a structured, avant-garde long coat that looked less like stage wear and more like modern battle armor, heavily embroidered with intricate traditional Korean motifs that shimmered menacingly under the harsh, blinding light. This wasn't just a pop idol getting ready to sing a catchy hook. This was a poet, a philosopher, a titan of the modern music industry preparing to bare his entire soul to the universe. When the first heavy, booming 808 bass drop echoed through the colossal, towering stadium speakers, it didn't just vibrate the concrete floorboards beneath the audience's feet. It sent a literal, visceral, electric shockwave straight through the hearts of everyone watching, including seasoned Western industry veterans and global superstars sitting in the VIP sections who were left visibly clutching their armrests in pure, unadulterated disbelief. You could literally see the frantic whispers spreading among the celebrity attendees on the live broadcast cameras, their eyes wide with the sudden realization that they were witnessing a once-in-a-lifetime piece of music history unfold in real time. RM didn't just perform, he unleashed a meticulously crafted, emotional storm of complex lyricism that violently traced his entire grueling journey. He visually and sonically painted the picture of his evolution from a hungry, angry, and misunderstood underground rapper known as Runch Randa, prowling the subterranean, smoke-filled hip-hop clubs of Seoul, to the eloquent, visionary global ambassador who stood before the United Nations General Assembly, speaking for an entire marginalized generation. Every single syllable he spat into that custom-made, heavy metallic microphone carried the unimaginable crushing weight of his monumental responsibilities, the relentless, suffocating pressure of leading the biggest, most influential musical act on the planet, the constant, ruthless scrutiny of the global media waiting for a single misstep, and the intense, bleeding internal battles of a young man desperately trying to carve out his own human identity amidst the blinding, disorienting glare of global superstardom. The stage design itself was a staggering visual masterpiece of high-concept storytelling, perfectly echoing the gripping edutainment documentary vibe we promised to deliver to you today. Massive, towering LED screens behind him projected sweeping, chaotic, high-definition visuals of crashing, stormy ocean waves violently dissolving into a mesmerizing shower of burning, glowing embers. This was a breathtaking, cinematic metaphor, perfectly symbolizing his recurring, deeply personal lyrical themes of destruction, artistic growing pains, and beautiful, inevitable rebirth, themes he heavily explored in his solo masterpieces like Indigo and the wildly erratic brilliance of Right Place, Wrong Person. Do you realize just how incredibly difficult it is to hold a colossal stadium of 80,000 screaming, frenzied people completely captive, wrapped tightly around your finger with absolutely nothing but your bare voice and a microphone stand? There were no massive, distracting backup dancer crews rushing the center stage to hide behind, no flashy, gimmicky pyrotechnics or explosive fireworks in the first half of the song, just RM pacing the sprawling stage like a majestic, caged lion finally tasting freedom. His deep, rumbling baritone cut through the chilly night air with the lethal, unforgiving precision of a surgeon's scalpel. You could physically see the heavy sweat glistening on his forehead, the intense, almost agonizing concentration deeply etched into his sharp features, and his fierce, dragon-like eyes as he locked unyielding gazes with the sweeping broadcast cameras. Even the camera work was meticulously choreographed, executing continuous, dizzying 360-degree pans that made the viewers at home feel flush with adrenaline, capturing the microscopic, gritty details, the veins popping in his neck, the white-knuckle grip on his microphone, and the fleeting, arrogant smirk before he delivered a lethal knockout punchline. It was a gaze so piercing it made every single viewer watching from their screens feel as though he was directly interrogating their very souls, demanding they look at their own reflections and question their own realities. As the intensely personal performance reached its dizzying, heart-pounding climax, the musical arrangement shifted dramatically, seamlessly blending hard-hitting golden-era boom-bap hip-hop beats with the haunting, mournful, and ancient wail of traditional Korean string instruments like the haegam. It was a brilliant, signature homage to his roots that educated the global masses on the rich, complex tapestry of his cultural heritage while simultaneously entertaining them to the absolute point of hysteria. He ripped through his complex verses with a breathless, ferocious intensity, his rhythmic delivery so incredibly razor-sharp, dynamic, and breathtakingly fast that it left prominent YouTube reaction channels, professional vocal coaches, and seasoned hip-hop heads scrambling to pause and rewind the footage over and over again. They were desperately trying to analyze his immaculate, superhuman breath control and his dizzyingly complex multi-syllabic rhyme schemes that rival the greatest rap legends in history. The sheer stamina required to execute such a relentless verbal assault without missing a single beat, dropping a single breath, or losing an ounce of swagger is something that vocal technicians are still hotly debating on online music forums today. And then came the definitive, earth-shattering moment that completely broke social media algorithms worldwide and cemented this stage in the history books. A sudden, dramatic, heart-stopping pause in the backing track, a heavy beat of total, agonizing silence enveloped the stadium, where you could literally hear the collective, trembling gasp of 80,000 people before RM delivered a final, devastating a cappella line completely unmiked. His natural, unamplified voice roared across the vast open-air stadium with such raw, unfiltered, and desperate emotion that it brought genuine, streaming tears to the eyes of millions watching around the globe. It was a visceral, unforgettable display of artistic supremacy that challenged the very definition of what a global pop star could be, violently tearing down the archaic boundaries between high art, profound poetry, and mainstream pop entertainment. It wasn't just a concert, it was a cultural reset, a fiery baptism that reminded absolutely everyone exactly why he holds the heavy mantle of the leader. Why do we place this breathtaking, mind-altering spectacle at only number 7 on our list, you might be asking yourself right now as you catch your breath? Because while it was undeniably a lyrical masterpiece and an absolute tour de force of commanding solo stage presence that will be studied in music schools for years to come, the real terrifying magic of this countdown is that the intensity, the shock value, and the sheer unadulterated scale of the performances only continue to skyrocket from here on out. Can you even begin to imagine what could possibly top the great leader's ultimate earth-shattering soliloquy? What kind of unbelievable vocal acrobatics, what sort of dangerous gravity-defying choreography, or what level of mind-bending stage production could possibly push the rest of the legendary members even higher up this insanely competitive elite list? The bar has been set astronomically, impossibly high right from the start. The proverbial gauntlet has been violently thrown onto the stage, and the entire world was officially put on high alert. This was RM claiming his rightful throne not just as a brilliant rapper, but as a legendary, generation-defining storyteller who forces you to look deep within yourself, leaving us all completely breathless, culturally enlightened, and desperately, hungrily waiting for whatever mind-bending, heart-stopping spectacle was coming next in this legendary showcase of titans.
Number 6. J-Hope. The king of the stage ignites, a dance of pure hellfire unleashed. Have you ever stared directly into the heart of a blazing, uncontrollable inferno and felt the terrifying magnetic pull of the massive flames calling your exact name, daring you to step into the heat? That is the precise, visceral, and heart-pounding sensation that violently gripped the global audience when the undeniable main dancer and absolute radiant sunshine of BTS, J-Hope, born Jungkook, completely shattered his bright, smiling persona to deliver a dark, gritty, and dangerously explosive solo stage that literally set the entertainment world ablaze and rewrote the rulebook for live performances. Picture this intensely dramatic scene unfolding before your eyes. The massive open-air stadium is instantly engulfed in an eerie, suffocating crimson-red light, accompanied by the heavy, thick scent of theatrical smoke and the distant, menacing, bone-rattling roar of revving motorcycle engines echoing ominously through the colossal surround sound speakers, instantly building a suffocating level of suspense. Suddenly, a massive multi-story metallic shipping container suspended precariously high above the main stage violently bursts open with a deafening pyrotechnic explosion, revealing J-Hope standing there alone, looking exactly like a post-apocalyptic warlord surveying his newly conquered territory. He wasn't dressed in his usual vibrant, colorful, and playful streetwear that the public is so accustomed to. Instead, he was heavily draped in distressed, scorched grunge attire, adorned with heavy, clinking silver chains, and wearing a rugged, oversized, custom-made leather jacket that looked like it had barely survived a chaotic, fiery riot, completely and utterly redefining his entire visual aesthetic in a single, breathless heartbeat. The exact moment his heavy combat-style boots slammed down onto the main stage floor, the live heavy metal rock band, completely hidden in the dark shadows, struck a distorted, aggressively loud, and bone-rattling electric guitar chord that sent literal physical shockwaves through the chests of the 80,000 screaming fans, instantly transforming what was supposed to be a standard pop concert into a gritty, underground, rebellious punk rock festival. But the true mind-bending spectacle wasn't just the millions of dollars worth of staggering, cutting-edge stage production. It was the sheer, terrifying physical mastery of his own human body. J-Hope didn't just dance for the crowd. He seemed to manipulate the very fabric of time and space around him, showcasing a level of intricate, superhuman body control that completely paralyzed professional choreographers, veteran backup dancers, and seasoned industry professionals watching worldwide. He seamlessly and aggressively transitioned from aggressive, bone-breaking crumping to fluid, impossibly smooth popping and locking isolations. Every single microscopic muscle twitch perfectly and mathematically synchronized to the heavy, chaotic downbeats of the live drum kit with a terrifying surgical precision. This wasn't just a meticulously choreographed routine meant to look cool on camera. This was a vivid, moving, and deeply educational masterclass in the rich, complex history of street dance, serving as a powerful, undeniable homage to his humble, gritty beginnings in the underground dance crews of Gwangju, South Korea. It told the hidden story of a young, hungry boy named Smile Hoya, who fiercely and relentlessly battled his way to the top of the fiercely competitive local hip-hop scene long before global superstardom was ever a tangible, realistic dream. The pure edutainment factor here is absolutely crucial to understand. J-Hope single-handedly educated millions of mainstream pop fans on the raw, unfiltered essence of authentic hip-hop cipher culture, successfully translating that intimate, raw street energy onto a colossal, high-tech stadium stage without losing a single solitary ounce of its gritty, underground authenticity. As the fiery, relentless performance escalated to its dizzying climax, actual towering pillars of scorching hot, real fire violently erupted from the stage floor in perfectly timed sequences, literally raising the physical temperature of the entire arena and bathing his intensely focused, sweat-drenched face in a terrifyingly beautiful, demonic orange glow. You could clearly and intimately see the agonizing physical toll the relentless performance was taking on his body through the ultra-high-definition broadcast cameras. The heavy, desperate heaving of his chest as he fought for oxygen, the thick veins prominently straining in his neck, yet his dark gaze remained lethally sharp, piercing straight through the dizzying array of swooping crane cameras with a predatory, unyielding intensity that demanded absolute, unquestioning submission from every single viewer. His live, aggressive rap delivery was completely flawless, a relentless, gravelly, and breathless verbal assault that cut straight through the deafening roar of the actual flames and the chaotic, heavy instrumental backing, proving once and for all that he is just as lethal, precise, and commanding with a microphone in his hand as he is with his feet on the dance floor. He was completely out of his mind, seemingly possessed by the heavy rhythm of the music, violently throwing his body across the massive stage with such reckless, explosive abandon that you genuinely, deeply feared he might actually tear a muscle or break a bone right there on live global television. And what about the notoriously hard-to-please industry giants watching from the exclusive VIP sections? The live broadcast brilliantly and strategically cut to sweeping reaction shots of legendary Western artists and powerful music executives who were literally standing on their expensive chairs, their mouths wide open in pure, unadulterated shock, furiously pointing at the stage and shaking their heads in complete, absolute disbelief at the sheer, unstoppable kinetic energy radiating from this one solitary performer who was dominating a stage big enough for 50 people. They were actively witnessing a man who had completely exorcised his inner demons in real time, masterfully transforming his deep-seated anxieties and the often suffocating immense pressure of his designated sunshine role into a dark, beautiful, and violently aggressive theatrical masterpiece that will be heavily analyzed for decades. Every single heavy stomp, every single sharp hip thrust, and every single breathless guttural shout into his custom-made microphone was a defiant, roaring statement of his ultimate artistic independence and his undisputed, unchallenged reign as one of the greatest, most electrifying live performers of our entire generation. As the final, catastrophic, and earth-shattering beat dropped, a massive, blinding wall of golden sparks violently repeatedly rained down from the stadium ceiling, entirely engulfing his silhouette in a blinding shower of magical light, leaving the massive audience desperately gasping for air, their ears ringing loudly and their hearts hammering painfully against their ribs, utterly destroyed and completely reborn by the sheer magnitude of what they had just witnessed. Why does this deeply fiery, gravity-defying, and culturally significant street dance masterclass only land at number 6 on our legendary, highly competitive countdown? You might ask yourself with absolute wide-eyed incredulity. Because while J-Hope flawlessly and brilliantly demonstrated the absolute physical pinnacle of dance and stage command, proving his undisputed title as the immortal king of kinetic energy, the upcoming, highly anticipated performances on this list are about to violently twist the emotional and vocal core of the audience in ways that are entirely unprecedented and deeply psychologically profound. If a literal, mind-bending, stage-burning inferno orchestrated by the greatest, most terrifyingly skilled dancer in the entire music industry is only sitting comfortably at number 6, what kind of unimaginable, emotionally devastating, or vocally earth-shattering phenomena could possibly be waiting in the shadows to violently claim the coveted top 5 spots? Will we see a performance that literally breaks the sound barrier with its high notes? A deeply personal, heart-wrenching ballad that brings the entire world to its knees in uncontrollable tears? Or a mind-bending, visually spectacular theatrical illusion that completely blurs the line between stark reality and pure magic? The suspense is absolutely suffocating. The stakes are rising exponentially higher with every single ticking second, and the true, unbelievable madness of this iconic countdown is only just beginning to unfold before your very eyes.
Number 5. Jungkook. The golden prodigy ascends, a symphony in rain, defying gravity. Imagine the immense, suffocating pressure of being globally labeled as the golden prodigy since the tender, incredibly vulnerable age of 15, constantly expected to be absolutely flawless in every single conceivable artistic discipline, from powerhouse vocals to bone-breaking choreography and even high-stakes visual directing. That was the invisible, crushing mountain resting squarely on the broad shoulders of Jungkook as he prepared to deliver what would undeniably become one of the most physically demanding, visually spectacular, and vocally superhuman performances in the entire history of live television broadcasting. The scene was set not in a traditional enclosed stadium, but in a sprawling open-air amphitheater right in the beating heart of a metropolis, where the dark, bruised storm clouds above weren't a high-tech CGI projection, but a genuine looming force of nature that threatened to completely derail the multi-million-dollar production. And then, as if choreographed by the universe itself, the sky violently ripped open, unleashing a torrential, blinding downpour exactly as the haunting, solitary melody of a grand piano began to echo through the massive speaker towers. Most artists would have panicked, signaled for an emergency stop, or at least scrambled for the safety of a covered stage, but not Jungkook. Instead, he stepped directly out into the unforgiving, freezing rain, wearing a custom-tailored, stark white silk suit that instantly clung to his sculpted frame, turning a potential logistical disaster into a cinematic, breathtakingly dramatic masterpiece that simply cannot be manufactured in a studio. The pure edutainment value of this profound moment lies in the sheer, undeniable reality of live performance variables. It teaches the global audience that true generational icons are not forged in safe, controlled environments, but are born from their extraordinary ability to adapt, conquer, and elevate unexpected chaos into high art. As the heavy, driving pop R&B beats suddenly dropped, sending literal shockwaves through the slick, flooded stage, Jungkook launched into a dizzying, relentlessly aggressive hip-hop choreography routine alongside 30 backup dancers, heavily splashing ankle-deep water into the air with every single sharp, aggressive stomp, creating a mesmerizing, slow-motion halo of illuminated droplets around his moving silhouette.
But here is the terrifying, mind-bending fact that completely broke the internet and sent professional vocal coaches on YouTube into a spiral of absolute disbelief. Despite executing a dance break so physically intense and aerobically draining that it would leave an Olympic athlete gasping for oxygen, Jungkook's live vocal feed, isolated from the heavy backing track, remained terrifyingly, impossibly stable, ringing out into the rainy night sky with the crystal-clear, piercing clarity of a pristine studio recording. He wasn't just surviving the grueling choreography, he was completely dominating it, effortlessly hitting soaring, earth-shattering high belts and executing incredibly complex, breathy R&B vocal runs while simultaneously sliding across the violently slippery, soaked floor on his knees. You could visibly see the heavy, freezing raindrops violently hitting his face, mixing with his own intense sweat, his dark hair plastered against his forehead, yet his piercing, doe-like eyes held a lethal, predatory focus, completely locking on to the dizzying array of swooping spider cameras with a dark, confident smirk that screamed absolute pop supremacy. This wasn't just a singer performing a hit song. This was a vivid, real-time documentary of human endurance, pushing the absolute razor-thin limits of lung capacity, muscle memory, and unwavering, ironclad mental fortitude. Let's deeply analyze the sheer physics of what he accomplished right there in the storm. Singing with extreme vocal resonance requires a completely stable core and immense diaphragm control, which is biologically and physically contradicted by the rapid, twisting, and explosive torso movements demanded by this specific brutal choreography. Yet, Jungkook bridged that impossible physical gap with the casual, terrifying ease of a seasoned veteran who had spent over a decade bleeding for his craft. It is a profound reflection of his grueling, relentless journey from a shy, quiet boy who once cried because he felt he couldn't sing well enough to the undisputed, unconquerable main pop boy of the entire world. In the highly exclusive, heavily guarded VIP viewing boxes, you could literally see industry legends leaning precariously over the glass balconies, completely ignoring the heavy rain soaking their expensive designer clothes, their eyes wide with a mixture of sheer awe and undeniable professional envy, actively witnessing the torch of ultimate pop perfection being violently snatched and raised to an impossible new height. Even global superstar Bruno Mars, sitting just a few rows back from the splash zone, was caught on a viral zoomed-in fan cam, instinctively taking off his signature sunglasses, shaking his head and mouthing words of absolute disbelief to his entourage as Jungkook hit a sustained, soaring, impossibly high C5 note while literally being thrown into the air by his dancers. Yes, this was the very spark that ignited the Bruno Mars was shocked global trending phenomenon, a tiny fleeting glimpse of genuine, unscripted respect from one undisputed master of the stage to another, bridging a massive cultural and linguistic divide through the universal, undeniable language of pure, unadulterated talent. Every single time the heavy bass thumped, Jungkook matched it with a visceral, magnetic energy that made the 80,000 fans in the arena completely forget that they were standing in a freezing monsoon, their deafening, synchronized fan chants roaring back at him with a desperate, feverish loyalty that physically shook the massive structural pillars of the stadium. It was a beautiful, chaotic, and emotionally overwhelming spectacle of a young man who had completely grown out of his youthful, hesitant shell, fully embracing his terrifying, God-given potential and transforming a terrifyingly hazardous, wet stage into his own personal, unconquerable kingdom of light and sound. The sheer cinematic brilliance of the rain acting as a natural spotlight, reflecting the violent laser beams cutting through the heavy mist, combined with his raw, unfiltered charisma, created a visual tableau that belongs in a museum of modern performance art. So, if this gravity-defying, rain-soaked, vocally superhuman display of absolute, undeniable golden perfection that legitimately left Western pop royalty utterly speechless is only ranking at number 5 on our intense, highly competitive countdown, what on earth could possibly be waiting for us in the top 4? How do you even begin to conceptualize a performance that outshines a flawless, torrential masterclass that literally broke the laws of human stamina and vocal physiology? Are we about to witness an emotional vulnerability so profound that it shatters the global consciousness, a theatrical stage design that defies the boundaries of modern technology, or a genre-bending musical evolution that completely redefines the very essence of what a live concert is supposed to be? The pressure is mounting to a dangerous boiling point. The stakes have officially breached the stratosphere, and the answers waiting in the next ranks will undoubtedly leave you completely breathless, questioning everything you thought you knew about the absolute pinnacle of live entertainment.
Number 4. Jimin. The swan's blackened wing, a shattered illusion transcending human limits. Imagine stepping into a colossal, modern, multi-million-dollar arena only to find it entirely stripped of its typical blinding LED screens and deafening pop concert pyrotechnics, replaced instead by the heavy, suffocating, and incredibly intimate atmosphere of an ancient, tragic European opera house waiting in absolute dread for its doomed protagonist to appear. This was the breathtaking, chilling scene that welcomed the world when the ethereal, gravity-defying contemporary dancer and lead vocalist of BTS, Park Jimin, claimed the stage, completely obliterating the conventional boundaries between mainstream K-pop entertainment and elite, highbrow theatrical performance art in a single devastating heartbeat. The arena was violently plunged into absolute pitch-black darkness, save for a single piercing beam of icy blue light that cut straight down from the towering rafters, illuminating Jimin completely alone in the dead center of the vast stage, kneeling barefoot on a surface that appeared to be a shimmering, flawless liquid mirror. He was dressed in a breathtakingly exquisite, custom-designed, gender-fluid ensemble, a stark white, deeply plunging silk blouse paired with a tightly structured dark velvet corset that aggressively constricted his waist, paired with flowing, asymmetrical trousers that moved exactly like liquid mercury with every single microscopic breath he took. This deliberate, masterful sartorial choice wasn't just for mere visual shock value. It was a profound, deeply educational visual essay on his career-long mission to violently dismantle archaic standards of toxic masculinity and completely redefine the global expectations of male beauty, wholeheartedly embracing a terrifyingly vulnerable, androgynous aesthetic that has made him an undeniable, universal muse for the world's biggest luxury fashion houses. When the haunting, solitary, and agonizingly slow note of a live weeping cello finally broke the suffocating silence, Jimin didn't just start to dance. He seemingly allowed his physical body to be violently possessed by the tragic, mourning melody flowing from the strings. As a former top-ranked student in the highly competitive modern dance department at the prestigious Busan High School of Arts, his entire artistic foundation is built upon a profound, anatomical understanding of physical storytelling. And here, on the biggest stage in the world, he unleashed an absolute masterclass in kinetic emotion that left seasoned ballerinas and veteran contemporary choreographers gasping for air in pure, unadulterated awe. He moved with a terrifying, contradictory blend of agonizing glass-like fragility and lethal whip-like physical power, violently throwing his body into dizzying off-axis pirouettes and brutal, bone-jarring drops to the mirrored floor, making the millions of viewers watching at home physically wince as they felt the phantom impact of his bare knees striking the cold, unforgiving surface. You have to deeply understand the sheer, excruciating physical toll this specific, incredibly demanding style of dance requires. Unlike the rhythmic, isolated popping and locking of street hip-hop, contemporary dance requires the artist to constantly pull from their deepest, darkest emotional traumas, literally using their entire skeletal structure as a raw instrument of pure agony. And Jimin was fearlessly bleeding his soul roll out onto that stage for 80,000 silent, mesmerized spectators who couldn't even bring themselves to cheer. As the musical arrangement slowly and ominously swelled, introducing a heavy, dark, trap-infused 808 bass beneath the weeping classical strings, the massive mirrored floor beneath him suddenly triggered a high-definition, mind-bending optical illusion, visually shattering into millions of jagged, glowing digital shards that reacted violently to his every frantic, desperate footstep. It was a staggering technological marvel that perfectly symbolized his deeply personal, internal battle with crippling self-doubt, the crushing, microscopic scrutiny of global fame, and the terrifying, very human fear of losing his own identity within the massive, towering shadow of the unstoppable BTS phenomenon. And then, amidst this dizzying, violent storm of physical exertion and blinding visual effects, came the vocals. Oh, the absolutely earth-shattering vocals that completely and utterly defied the anatomical limitations of the human vocal cords. Jimin is globally renowned for his incredibly unique, angelic countertenor register, but on this night, he completely weaponized it, pushing his delicate voice to a raw, ragged, and desperately aggressive edge that the public had never truly heard before. He sang completely live, his custom microphone tightly strapped to his sharp jawline, entirely exposed without a heavy backing track to hide his fatigue, and every single desperate intake of oxygen was broadcasted to the entire world, adding a layer of raw, unfiltered intimacy that made millions of viewers feel as though they were intruding on a deeply private, agonizing confession. He effortlessly hit a soaring, crystalline, and impossibly sustained high note while literally suspended mid-air in a gravity-defying grand jeté leap, his body arched violently backward in a terrifying crescent moon shape, creating a moment of pure, agonizing physical suspension that looked so impossibly perfect it could have been meticulously carved from marble by a Renaissance master. The broadcast camera angles were fiercely intimate and aggressively dynamic, zooming in so incredibly close that you could clearly see the heavy, glistening tracks of genuine, unscripted tears mingling with the sweat on his flawlessly contoured cheekbones. His dark, mesmerizing eyes conveyed a depth of sorrow and desperate longing that spoken words alone could never possibly articulate. In the highly exclusive VIP sections, the reaction was absolutely not the raucous screaming hype we witnessed in the previous performances. Instead, it was a heavy, paralyzed, and profoundly deeply moved silence, with veteran music producers, global pop stars, and seasoned media critics sitting frozen in their expensive seats, some literally covering their mouths with trembling hands, their eyes genuinely glistening with unshed tears as they witnessed a pop idol completely transcend the limitations of his genre to become a true, undeniable artist in the purest, most devastating sense of the word. He completely commanded the suffocating energy of the massive stadium with a mere subtle twitch of his fingertips, a sharp, agonizing intake of oxygen, and a gaze so intensely vulnerable that it completely shattered the emotional defenses of absolutely everyone watching, forcing them to deeply confront their own hidden pains and insecurities. This was not merely an edutainment spectacle meant to visually dazzle the senses for a few fleeting minutes. It was a profound mass psychological therapy session orchestrated by a man who has completely mastered the terrifying art of turning his deepest bleeding wounds into a universal healing light for millions around the globe. When the final heavy orchestral chord violently crashed, the single piercing spotlight instantly snapped off, leaving the entire stadium in total, ringing darkness for what felt like an absolute agonizing eternity, before the crowd finally erupted into a deafening, hysterical standing ovation that literally registered on local seismic monitors, unleashing a primal roar of immense gratitude and absolute awe for the masterpiece they had just consumed.
Now, as you desperately try to wipe the tears from your own eyes and slow your racing heartbeat, you must ask yourself the most terrifying question of this entire legendary countdown. If a performance so deeply devastating, vocally superhuman, and visually transcendent that it literally brought the entire global music industry to a collective weeping standstill, is only sitting comfortably at number 4, what on earth is waiting for us in the intensely guarded top 3? How do you possibly follow up a theatrical masterpiece that completely shattered the human soul and entirely redefined the very concept of live emotional storytelling? The stakes have officially crossed the threshold of reality. The pressure is literally unbearable, and the sheer unpredictable madness of the remaining legends on this list is guaranteed to completely blow your mind.
Number 3. Suga. The Datrita King returns, a brutal masterpiece, unapologetic. Imagine the absolute, deafening silence that falls over a colossal 80,000-seat stadium when the towering multi-million-dollar LED screens suddenly glitch out, violently flashing a stark, blood-red warning sign before aggressively cutting to pure, menacing black. This was the exact heart-stopping moment when Min Yoongi, the razor-sharp, notoriously introverted lead rapper and legendary genius-level producer of BTS, violently shed his polished idol persona to resurrect his fiercely independent, terrifyingly raw hip-hop alter ego, August D, delivering a stage so dangerously intense and fiercely unapologetic that it genuinely felt like a massive illegal underground rebellion rather than a mainstream global pop concert. The colossal stage was entirely transformed into a breathtaking dystopian vision of an ancient Korean royal palace, but instead of pristine, colorful architecture, the massive wooden pillars were heavily charred, violently smoldering, and draped in massive, torn black banners that aggressively whipped in the artificial high-powered stadium wind. The heavy, unmistakable, and deeply resonant sound of a traditional Korean gong violently shattered the freezing night air, instantly sending massive physical shockwaves through the concrete floorboards and straight into the heavily pounding chests of the hyperventilating global audience, serving as the ultimate, terrifying battle cry for the undisputed king's return. When the blinding, piercing white spotlights finally snapped on with the terrifying sound of a heavy steel cage dropping, there stood Suga, completely alone at the absolute pinnacle of a massive sweeping staircase, looking down at the sea of humanity with a gaze so intensely cold, deeply arrogant, and lethally unbothered that it literally made the temperature in the massive arena plummet. He wasn't wearing his usual perfectly tailored designer pop star suits. Instead, he was clad in a raw, heavily distressed, and darkly modern interpretation of a traditional hanbok, aggressively layered with heavy, asymmetrical leather straps and a massive, dangerous-looking silver chain that hung heavily from his neck, perfectly mirroring the heavy, inescapable burdens of his agonizing past. But the absolute, undeniable visual centerpiece that completely broke the global internet and sent the entire music industry into an absolute frantic meltdown was the very real, very heavy, and terrifyingly sharp traditional Korean sword strapped tightly to his waist, a brilliant, deeply educational visual metaphor for his razor-sharp lyricism that has mercilessly cut through industry corruption, toxic media narratives, and his own crippling internal demons for over a decade. As the heavy, aggressive, trap-infused beat violently dropped, completely shaking the structural foundations of the stadium, Suga didn't just walk down those massive stairs. He prowled with the slow, terrifying, and deeply calculated swagger of an apex predator who has absolutely nothing left to lose and everything to utterly destroy. This is the very core of the intense, raw edutainment value we are delivering today. You are not just watching a man rap, you are witnessing a profound, intensely psychological autopsy of a tortured genius who physically built his massive empire from the dark, damp, and freezing underground studios of Daegu, selling his deeply personal, bleeding beats for literal pennies just to afford a single bowl of noodles, all the way to sitting on the highest, most untouchable throne of the global music industry. The sheer, terrifying physical stamina required to execute his signature, breathless, rapid-fire rap delivery completely live, without a single solitary backing track to lean on, is a vocal feat that leaves veteran, gold-selling hip-hop legends shaking their heads in absolute stunned disbelief. He gripped his custom-made, heavily dented microphone with a white-knuckle intensity, aggressively spitting his complex, deeply cutting, multi-syllabic rhymes with such a visceral, venomous, and unyielding ferocity that you could literally see the prominent, thick veins violently bulging in his neck, the heavy, glistening sweat pouring down his intensely focused, sharp features, completely illuminating the faint, fading surgical scar on his shoulder, a very real, permanent physical reminder of his agonizing, poverty-stricken past and his relentless, terrifying climb to the absolute top. The live broadcast cameras brilliantly and aggressively captured every single microscopic detail of his fury, utilizing dizzying, extreme close-ups that aggressively threw the global audience directly into the heavy, suffocating crossfire of his intense lyrical assault, making every single viewer feel as though they were being personally, brutally interrogated by the rap god himself. And then came the absolute, heart-stopping climax of the performance, a moment so profoundly shocking and visually spectacular that it instantly became cemented in the holy halls of live television history. Halfway through the intensely heavy, guitar-driven rock-rap crossover track, a massive, towering cage of genuine, scorching hot, real fire violently erupted around him, completely isolating him from the rest of the world in a terrifying, beautiful, and blinding inferno. Instead of shrinking away from the dangerous, searing heat, Suga leaned heavily into it, his raspy, guttural voice violently tearing through the deafening roar of the massive flames, delivering a deeply personal, fiercely aggressive, and heartbreakingly raw verse about his intense struggles with crippling depression, the suffocating dark anxiety of sudden global fame, and his absolute, unyielding refusal to ever compromise his artistic integrity for cheap, fleeting mainstream validation. The highly exclusive, heavily guarded VIP sections were completely, utterly paralyzed in a state of sheer, unadulterated shock. Prominent, notoriously critical Western music journalists, powerful industry executives, and seasoned A-list celebrities were caught entirely off guard by the sheer, unapologetic brutality of the stage, their mouths hanging wide open in complete disbelief as they actively witnessed a mainstream K-pop idol successfully and authentically execute a gritty, aggressive, and deeply profound hardcore hip-hop set that completely rivaled the greatest, most legendary rap performances in modern history. He completely dominated the colossal stage with a terrifying, magnetic, and completely effortless aura, proving once and for all the true generational power doesn't come from massive, distracting dance crews or perfectly polished pop smiles, but from a raw, bleeding, and violently honest soul fiercely screaming its truth into the dark, unforgiving void of the universe. When he finally delivered his absolute, last, devastating, breathless line, he didn't wait for the applause. He simply dropped his heavy microphone on the charred stage floor with a deafening, echoing thud, violently turned his back on the 80,000 screaming, utterly hysterical fans, and slowly walked away into the dark, suffocating smoke, leaving behind an absolute, smoking crater of global devastation, a deeply altered cultural landscape, and an audience that was literally gasping, sobbing, and desperately begging for air. But wait, the absolute madness didn't just end there, because in a brilliant, deeply emotional twist that completely shattered the hardened, intimidating facade he had just spent 20 minutes aggressively building, he suddenly reappeared sitting quietly on a solitary, worn-out wooden stool, clutching a beautifully customized acoustic guitar, heavily covered in deeply personal handwritten messages from his 6 beloved brothers. The massive, roaring, adrenaline-fueled stadium was instantly plunged into a heavy, weeping, and profoundly reverent silence as his fiercely aggressive demeanor completely melted away, replaced by a heartbreakingly gentle, terribly vulnerable, and deeply acoustic performance of a song that violently tore open his most painful, traumatic childhood memories for the entire world to witness. The sheer, unprecedented emotional whiplash of transitioning directly from a fiery, unapologetic sword-wielding rap god, violently demanding absolute submission, to a quiet, deeply scarred, and profoundly beautiful musician softly singing about his mother's painful surgery and his own horrific, near-fatal traffic accident, was an artistic masterstroke of absolute pure genius that left absolutely no dry eye in the entire colossal arena. This incredible, mind-bending duality is exactly what makes Min Yoongi an absolute, untouchable titan of the global music industry. He possesses the incredibly rare, terrifying ability to violently hype up an 80,000-person crowd into a frenzied, hardcore mosh pit, and then in the very next breath, completely shatter their hearts into a million tiny, irreparable pieces with a single, fragile strum of his acoustic guitar and a tearful, deeply honest vocal delivery. The camera aggressively panned to capture the massive, sprawling ocean of glowing synchronized army bombs, which had completely shifted from a violent, flashing, aggressive red to a soft, warm, and deeply comforting amber glow, beautifully reflecting the profound, unbreakable, and intensely protective bond between the artist and his globally massive, dedicated fandom. You could physically feel.
Number 2. V. The Phantom's Velvet Kiss, a jazz noir illusion stopping time itself. Have you ever experienced a moment so profoundly intoxicating that the very concept of time seems to completely dissolve into a thick, hazy mist of pure, unadulterated cinematic nostalgia? As we breach the absolutely critical, heavily guarded threshold of our runner-up spot, we must violently transport you out of a modern, colossal stadium and plunge you deep into the heart of a smoky, seductive, and dangerously glamorous 1920s underground jazz club, meticulously constructed right in the middle of a screaming modern metropolis. This was the breathtaking, reality-bending illusion flawlessly orchestrated by the visual king and deeply soulful baritone of BTS, V, born Kim Tae-young, who completely paralyzed the global audience with a masterclass in vintage theatrics, subtle acting, and impossibly deep vocal resonance. The massive, high-tech stadium lights were abruptly and completely severed, replaced only by the dim, flickering, warm amber glow of antique tungsten bulbs and a heavy, suffocating layer of theatrical fog that rolled menacingly across the stage like a living, breathing phantom. Suddenly, the slow, agonizingly seductive wail of a solitary live saxophone cut through the freezing night air, followed by a single, piercing spotlight that dramatically illuminated V sitting casually at a meticulously detailed vintage mahogany bar, nursing a crystalline glass of what appeared to be dark amber whiskey. He wasn't dressed like a conventional modern pop idol. He was impeccably draped in a painfully sharp, custom-tailored emerald green three-piece suit that practically screamed old Hollywood royalty. His dark, wavy hair perfectly styled to fall effortlessly over one piercing, dangerously magnetic eye. The sheer, terrifying edutainment value of this specific performance lies in its profound, unapologetic rejection of modern, high BPM pop trends, boldly and forcefully dragging 80,000 hysterical teenagers and seasoned industry veterans alike into a deep cultural appreciation of classical jazz, neo-soul, and complex theatrical blocking. When V finally brought the heavy, silver, vintage broadcasting microphone to his lips, he didn't shout or try to aggressively hype the massive crowd. Instead, he unleashed a dark, impossibly rich and honeyed baritone note so incredibly low and physically resonant that it literally vibrated the liquid in the water bottles of the front row audience and completely short-circuited the expectations of every single vocal coach watching worldwide. You have to deeply understand the sheer biological rarity of his specific vocal texture in the modern mainstream pop industry. While the world is constantly chasing soaring, sky-high tenors and bright, aggressive belts, Taehyung possesses a beautifully dark, velvety, and incredibly weighty lower register that carries the heavy, emotional gravity of a seasoned blues legend who has lived 1,000 agonizing lifetimes. He navigated the complex, wildly unpredictable jazz melodies with the terrifying, effortless swagger of a true musical prodigy, playfully sliding behind the heavy downbeats, dragging out his sultry phrasing, and completely bending the live 8-piece brass section to his absolute unyielding will. But the absolute, undeniable magic of V lies not just in his spectacular, unique vocal cords, but in his terrifyingly brilliant, deeply instinctual ability to act with his entire physical being. He completely transformed the massive, empty stadium stage into an intimate, suffocatingly tense one-man film noir, heavily utilizing a vintage rotary telephone prop to have a deeply emotional, entirely one-sided conversation with an invisible phantom lover that was so fiercely believable it left millions of viewers genuinely breathless and clutching their chests in phantom agony. The live high-definition broadcast cameras were forced to completely abandon their usual frantic, fast-paced K-pop editing style, opting instead for a single, unbroken, and agonizingly slow tracking shot that mirrored the heavy, deliberate cinematography of an Oscar-winning Martin Scorsese masterpiece. This intensely intimate camera work violently zoomed in on his face, capturing every single devastating micro-expression, the slight, arrogant twitch of his beautifully sculpted jawline, the heavy, mournful drop of his dark eyelashes, and that signature, lethal, asymmetrical smirk that has effortlessly launched 1,000 global fashion campaigns and broken millions of hearts simultaneously. He wasn't just singing a ballad, he was fiercely seducing the very camera lens, treating the cold glass eye of the broadcast equipment like his most intimate, deeply cherished confidant, effectively pulling 80,000 live spectators and millions of home viewers directly into his private, intoxicating, and dangerously smoky universe. In the highly exclusive, heavily guarded VIP viewing platforms, the reaction was unlike anything seen in pop history. Prominent A-list Hollywood actors, legendary Western musicians, and notoriously stoic fashion house directors were visibly entirely entranced, their heads slowly bobbing to the heavy, sultry rhythm, violently whispering to each other in sheer, unadulterated disbelief at the absolute, overwhelming charisma violently radiating from a single stationary man. They were actively witnessing a true generational icon who effortlessly bridges the massive, often insurmountable gap between classic, untouchable cinematic elegance and modern, hysterical global pop superstardom, proving that true, lasting magnetism doesn't require a massive backup dance crew or explosive pyrotechnics, but merely a single, perfectly timed gaze and a voice that feels like warm, heavy velvet wrapping around your soul. As the slow, agonizingly seductive jazz arrangement slowly built towards its heavy, dramatic climax, V casually stood up, violently kicked the heavy wooden stool aside with a sudden, aggressive burst of hidden energy, and executed a brief, flawlessly smooth and entirely improvised tap dance sequence that seamlessly merged into a sultry, slow-motion contemporary body roll, completely shattering the collective sanity of the massive, roaring stadium. He then grabbed the heavy microphone stand with a sudden white-knuckle intensity, aggressively tilting it backwards as he unleashed a soaring, surprisingly raspy, and deeply powerful falsetto note that completely proved he is not merely confined to his legendary lower register, but is a terrifyingly versatile, multi-dimensional vocal powerhouse who simply chooses when and how to completely destroy you. The final heavy brassy chord violently struck, and V simply raised a single gloved finger to his lips in a universal gesture of total, suffocating silence, blowing a slow, deliberate kiss into the heavy theatrical fog right before the entire stadium plunged into absolute pitch-black darkness, leaving behind a crowd so deeply hypnotized, so completely intoxicated by his sheer, effortless magnetism that they literally forgot to breathe for a solid 10 seconds before erupting in a deafening, hysterical wail of absolute, desperate withdrawal. This was not merely a concert performance, it was a profound, deeply emotional hostage situation, a gorgeous cinematic masterpiece that completely rewired the global brain chemistry and forcefully set an impossibly high, deeply sophisticated standard for what a solo pop stage can truly artistically achieve. Number 1. Jin. The silver voice ascends, a cosmic epiphany, defying the heavens. Have you ever witnessed a human being completely transcend their mortal limitations to become a literal, shining celestial body on a stage so incredibly vast and overwhelming that it genuinely felt as though the entire universe had paused its infinite expansion just to listen to him sing? As we finally reach the absolute, heavily guarded, and deeply coveted summit of our legendary countdown, we must violently tear away every single preconceived notion you have ever held about mainstream pop vocals and prepare your soul to be completely shattered and flawlessly rebuilt by the undisputed reigning silver-voiced king of BTS, Jin, born Kim Suk-jin. This wasn't just a concert performance. It was a profound, deeply emotional homecoming, a breathtaking, gravity-defying, multi-million-dollar theatrical triumph that firmly and unapologetically established him not just as the eldest young of the world's biggest musical act, but as an untouchable, legendary vocal powerhouse who literally commands the very stars in the sky. Picture the absolute suffocating tension inside a colossal open-air stadium packing nearly 100,000 hysterical fans, instantly plunged into a terrifying, pitch-black void so absolute that the only visible light source was the massive, frantic, glowing ocean of army bombs desperately waiting for their king to appear. Suddenly, without a single warning, a deafening, cinematic orchestral swell of live strings and heavy, booming timpani drums violently shook the massive concrete foundation of the arena, followed by a breathtaking, state-of-the-art holographic projection that completely enveloped the entire stadium in a blinding, hyper-realistic, three-dimensional simulation of a swirling, majestic galaxy. The sheer, terrifying edutainment value of this unprecedented technological marvel lies in its incredibly precise, astronomically accurate depiction of a supernova, serving as a profound, beautifully educational, and deeply emotional visual metaphor for Jin's own agonizing, spectacular evolution from an insecure, classically trained acting student at Konkuk University who once genuinely believed he was merely filling a superficial visual role, to the undisputed, soaring vocal anchor of the entire group. When the blinding stardust-like illumination finally coalesced at the absolute center of the massive stage, there stood Jin, entirely alone on a towering, slowly rotating hydraulic pedestal, draped in a breathtaking, custom-tailored, heavily embellished, pure white military-inspired coat, completely encrusted with thousands of hand-sewn, sparkling Swarovski crystals that caught the frantic stadium lasers and fractured them into a million blinding prisms of pure, angelic light. The sheer, overwhelming majesty of his visual presence was so intensely paralyzing that the deafening, roaring crowd was instantly, collectively struck into a weeping, reverent silence, entirely captivated by his unbelievably flawless, broad-shouldered silhouette cutting through the heavy theatrical fog like a divine, mythical being descending directly from the heavens. But the true world-stopping magic violently erupted the exact millisecond he brought his heavy, custom-made, glittering pink microphone to his lips and unleashed the first impossibly clear and heartbreakingly fragile note of a soaring, cinematic rock ballad that was so deeply, intimately raw, it physically ached to listen to. You must deeply understand the intense biological difficulty of executing his specific legendary vocal technique. Jin possesses what industry veterans, professional vocal coaches, and renowned producers universally refer to as a perfectly supported, crystal clear silver voice, a rare, piercing tenor register that cuts through the heaviest, most chaotic instrumental backing tracks with the terrifying, lethal precision of a diamond-tipped blade. As the deeply emotional song fiercely escalated, shedding its delicate acoustic beginnings to violently explode into a massive, heavy stadium rock anthem fueled by screaming, distorted electric guitars and a relentless, crashing live drum kit, Jin completely defied every single anatomical limitation of the human vocal cords, effortlessly launching into a staggering, dizzying series of sustained, soaring high notes that literally broke the sound barrier and completely shattered the collective sanity of the global audience. He wasn't just briefly hitting those terrifyingly high, incredibly demanding B4s and C5s. He was absolutely living inside them, holding them with such an unwavering, terrifying, and superhuman breath control that prominent YouTube vocal analysts and seasoned musicians were forced to freeze-frame the live broadcast footage just to verify that he wasn't secretly leaning on a pre-recorded backing track. But he absolutely wasn't. Every single desperate intake of oxygen, every single heavy, emotional crack in his velvety voice, and every single violently powerful chest-thumping belt was completely, unapologetically, and flawlessly live, echoing through the cold night air with the profound, inescapable resonance of a massive cathedral bell. You could vividly see the heavy, glistening beads of sweat rolling down his perfectly sculpted, globally renowned, worldwide handsome face, his thick neck veins prominently straining against the sheer physical exertion of pushing his diaphragm to its absolute breaking point. Yet his intensely expressive, deeply soulful eyes remained fiercely locked on the massive, weeping ocean of fans, conveying a lifetime of agonizing sacrifices, immense crushing pressure, and an absolute unconditional love that utterly transcended spoken language or cultural barriers. The live broadcast cameras aggressively zoomed in on the highly exclusive VIP viewing decks, successfully capturing seasoned, notoriously hard-to-please Western music executives, legendary pop divas, and powerful industry titans who were visibly, openly weeping, their hands desperately clutching their faces in pure, unadulterated shock as they actively witnessed a live vocal phenomenon that completely rivaled the greatest, most untouchable legends in entire music history. The sheer, unprecedented emotional magnitude of this specific performance was a direct, violent culmination of his entire grueling artistic journey spanning over a decade, a massive, intensely cathartic release of every single agonizing doubt, every single brutal vocal lesson he forced himself to endure, and every single silent tear he had ever shed behind closed doors while desperately trying to keep up with the natural, terrifying prodigies that are his younger brothers. He completely transformed his deep-seated historical insecurities into an invincible shining suit of armor, brilliantly weaponizing his classically trained acting background to physically embody the agonizing, beautiful lyrics, his hands desperately reaching up towards the fake, holographic stars, as if trying to physically tear the heavens open with his bare hands to pull down the very moon for his audience. As the final earth-shattering and deafening orchestral chord violently crashed through the arena, Jin violently threw his head back, tightly gripped the microphone stand, and unleashed one absolute, final, soaring falsetto run that was so incredibly high, so impossibly pure, and so deeply, profoundly devastating that it literally brought 80,000 people simultaneously crashing to their knees, their hysterical, sobbing cheers completely drowning out the massive stadium speakers in a terrifying, uncontrollable tidal wave of sheer worship. He stood there for what felt like an absolute eternity, completely bathed in a blinding, cascading waterfall of gold and crackling pyrotechnics, his broad chest heaving heavily, a beautifully arrogant, deeply satisfied and tear-soaked smile slowly spreading across his flawless face as he silently surveyed the massive, beautiful global empire he had painstakingly helped build from the very ground up. This was not merely a pop star executing a difficult high note. This was a defining, legendary, and entirely paradigm-shifting moment in modern music history, an absolute, irrefutable proof that raw, unrelenting hard work, profound emotional intelligence, and an unbreakable ironclad spirit can violently conquer any obstacle, entirely silence any critic, and forcefully claim the absolute, undisputed throne of live entertainment. It is with absolute, unwavering certainty, profound global reverence, and a deeply shattered and entirely remade heart that we officially, proudly crown this soaring, emotionally devastating, and vocally superhuman cosmic masterpiece as the undisputed #1 most iconic performance of the year, forever cementing Kim Suk-jin's legacy as the ultimate, untouchable silver-voiced god of the entire music universe.
And there you have it, the absolute pinnacle of live entertainment, a breathtaking, gravity-defying journey through the top 7 most iconic, mind-bending, and culturally earth-shattering BTS performances of the entire year. We have violently swung from the deeply philosophical, poetic storms of RM's lyrical genius in the pitch-black stadium straight through the terrifying, hellfire street dance exorcisms of J-Hope, the superhuman, rain-soaked vocal miracles of Jungkook, the agonizingly beautiful theatrical tragedy of Jimin, the fiery, unapologetic hip-hop rebellion of Suga, the time-stopping vintage jazz illusions of V, and finally, all the way up to the absolutely god-tier cosmic vocal ascension of Jin that literally forced the heavens to weep and left global legends like Bruno Mars completely and utterly paralyzed in sheer disbelief. This wasn't just a simple, everyday pop culture countdown. This was a profound, deeply educational masterclass in raw human resilience, a terrifyingly beautiful, real-time documentary showcasing exactly what happens when 7 incredibly distinct, wildly talented individuals completely refuse to bow down to the suffocating, crushing pressures of the massive global music industry, choosing instead to violently rewrite the entire historical rule book of performance art with their bare hands, their bleeding sweat, and their unbreakable, ironclad brotherhood. But as the heavy theatrical smoke finally clears, the roaring stadium lights slowly fade into an echoing nostalgic silence, and your racing heart desperately tries to find its normal resting rhythm once again, we have to leave you with a terrifying, deeply provocative question that will undoubtedly keep you intensely staring at your ceiling long into the dead of night. If this is the absolute, astronomical, and unprecedented level of sheer, unadulterated perfection they have achieved right now, effortlessly dominating the global consciousness and making seasoned Western pop royalty violently sweat through their expensive designer suits, what unimaginable, reality-breaking, and historically monumental spectacles are they quietly, dangerously brewing in the dark for their next inevitable explosive return? Are we, as a global audience, even biologically or psychologically prepared to survive whatever catastrophic, deeply beautiful masterpiece they unleash upon the world next? Or will the entire global music infrastructure simply collapse under the immense, crushing weight of their next evolutionary leap? The undeniable, terrifying truth is that the BTS phenomenon is no longer just a simple K-pop success story. It is a vital, living, and aggressively breathing global curriculum on absolute artistic supremacy. And class, my friends, is permanently and fiercely in session. So, before you completely lose your mind trying to process the sheer magnitude of what you just witnessed, hit that subscribe button like your very survival depends on it. Flood the comment section below with your own personal mind-blown reactions and fiercely debate which specific heart-stopping moment from this legendary list completely shattered your soul, because this wild, unpredictable, and entirely unforgettable edutainment ride is absolutely undeniably far from over.